Hey, let's talk about Pluto, the planet everybody loves. Up until a few years ago, these were the best images that we had of Pluto, and they came from the Hubble Space Telescope. Hubble was discovered by Clyde Tombaugh, which is a pretty cool story. There was an eccentric millionaire named Percival Lowell. He's the one that built the Lowell Observatory outside of Flagstaff, Arizona, up on a mountain. And he hired this guy, I want to say kid, to do some stuff around the place. And he slowly worked up to where he was doing some actual astronomy. And he discovered what Percival Lowell dubbed as Planet X. Lowell was convinced there had to be another planet out there, and being an eccentric millionaire, built this observatory to find it. Clyde Tombaugh found it in 1930, but it was much fainter than expected. All the planets out there, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, were huge. And this seemed to be a little tiny thing, which was puzzling at the time. Should have been a clue. So Tombaugh used what was called a blink comparator. They would take the same image of the sky at two different times, and then these glass plates would be set up side by side, and there was a little machine. You'd flip a lever, and it would go back and forth between one image and the next. And the human brain is really good at detecting changes in patterns. And that's how he found it, was hours and hours of flipping through these pictures. It was done in this building, so this is an extremely science teacher geeky moment for me, where I got to go visit where he did it. And yeah, the door was locked. Pluto has got 5 moons. We didn't know about any of them until the 70s. We discovered the latest one not too long ago. Its density means it's gotta be ice and rock. We knew it had an atmosphere with some features. And then in 2006, we launched the New Horizons spacecraft, which took 9 years to get to Pluto. That's saying a lot. It's really far out there. So the last time I gave these notes, I didn't have these slides. We didn't have these pictures. This one's pretty cool. This is a GIF from, not GIF from NASA. So this is an image from Hubble Space Telescope. So that is just an awesome transition of how much better we've gotten with it. As New Horizons was approaching, you could start to see the various moons and everything around Pluto. New Horizons flew past Pluto. Okay, I shouldn't say flew. It streaked. It went like ludicrous speed. And the reason was they would have needed extra rockets and extra fuel to slow down and go into orbit. So they decided to do it on the cheap. They decided to send a spacecraft that can't slow down. It'll just keep zipping along at whatever speed it was left, whenever the engines shut off. And so all of our data was taken over a period of something like 15 hours. I can't remember. But the New Horizons spacecraft didn't send information back to NASA until it was over with. They set up the computers and sensors to gather as much information as possible, and then it took about a year to send all of the data back to Earth. But these were some of the early images. We had these, I think, within that day or the next day. And one of them that just blew everybody's mind was this one. We actually don't have good detailed pictures of the backside because, remember, we flew by it really fast. but we could see that there are mountains on Pluto. There are canyons, and this would be frozen. We might be looking at nitrogen here, like frozen nitrogen. They've got some nice close-ups. There's the highlands here, where there's fewer craters, so we know it's a newer surface. And I don't remember if we've really figured out what these pits are. I don't know if this is soil that we're looking at or frozen nitrogen, kind of like a frozen ocean sort of thing. Always reminds me of the pits of despair. Don't even think about trying to escape. And then the biggest moon, Charon, was the ferryman of Hades. So that's a pretty darn good picture. And notice that it's not really perfectly round either. There's a lot of history in this image that we'd like to figure out. So the big question is Pluto a planet or a Kuiper Belt object? Kuiper Belt is kind of like the asteroid belt, but it's way out beyond Neptune. The problem is we kept finding objects out in the same orbit as Pluto. So we're starting to doubt, is Pluto actually a planet, or is it like just a big asteroid, and that's the one we found, 90 years ago, and then called it a planet for a long time? So this guy, Mike Brown, has discovered many of these objects. Trans-Neptunian objects are things beyond Pluto. He discovered Eris. When he discovered it, he called it Xena, which shows his sense of humor. If you're familiar with 90s TV shows, Xena was the warrior princess that wore a skimpy outfit and was a little bit scandalous. So when it was announced, I remember we were in the physics lab at Kennesaw, and we heard about the discovery, and we were all excited, that we found something else out there. And when we heard the name, we were like, wait, this is a joke, right? I mean, I guess it's like naming something today after who's famous today. I don't know any celebrities anymore. Yeah. He found Sedna, Almea, so I'm going to talk about some of those. He does a lot on Twitter. His username on Twitter is Pluto Killer. His bio says astronomer, planet hunter, Pluto killer, bear whisperer, finger-wrapped dad, dangerous secularist, striving to be anti-racist and anti-sexist. I thought that's pretty cool. I tweet him here and there, and last week I tweeted him, said, making my notes for Thursday of this week, although it's Monday of the week after. How many KBOs, TNOs have you discovered? Anything new? He says, honestly, I don't know the number. Many hundreds. I just remember the fun ones. I took his Science of the Solar System class online, so pretty neat guy. So when he discovered other objects, the International Astronomical Union, those responsible for giving names to objects, had to rethink, what is a planet? Is Pluto just one of the things out there? Are there a bunch of planets? So they came up with the three-prong definition of a planet, which we've never had to do before. A planet was just something that orbited the sun. We have Ceres in the asteroid belt, which is the largest object in the asteroid belt. And in the 1800s, it and another asteroid were thought of as planets. We never really defined a planet until 2006. So here's what they said. They said that the object has to be in orbit around the sun, which is kind of one of those duh things. But a few years after that, we discovered an asteroid that went fairly close to the sun, and as far as we could tell, it didn't come from our solar system, so it was not in orbit around the sun. This was the large cigar-shaped asteroid that just passed through. So we have found some things that don't orbit the sun. They're not part of our solar system. They just pass through. They have to have enough mass to be a nearly round shape. Enough mass means a lot of gravity, which pulls it in all directions and forms a round shape. And then it has to have cleared its neighborhood in its orbit. The asteroid belt is a bunch of pieces where Ceres didn't clear the neighborhood. It has not gathered up all the material. The material's just floating around out there. And this is the test where Pluto is considered no longer to be a planet. It did not clear out its neighborhood. It wasn't massive enough. There are other objects out there, lots of them. Mike Brown said if students were going to memorize the number of planets, with Pluto being the 9th, like I did when I was in school, he said there would be about 200 planets to memorize. So it kind of makes sense that Pluto and those other objects are definitely different somehow. So I always ask the question, what do you think? Is it a planet or a dwarf planet? Pluto has been classified as a dwarf planet. So those pictures that came from New Horizons just, in the age of social media now, just set off some really, really cool pictures. A lot of people saw that spot, that light spot there, as a heart. I don't. I'm going to spoil it for you. This one is kind of cool. It's, just a funny thing where it's the heart, and then off to the right of the heart, coronary artery disease, the charging socket, disputed territory, grease stains, bugs, snake pit. They're just having fun naming stuff. But let me warn you, the next picture will totally ruin the heart for you, and I'm okay with that because this one makes a lot more sense. There's debate of what Pluto was named after. Definitely named after the Greek god of the underworld. But did it have anything to do with Disney? We kind of think so. And I can never ever see the heart anymore. I always see Pluto, which actually just makes me smile. I love that. That's a cool one to me. So other things out there besides Neptune. Let's talk a little bit more detail about this asteroid, the Kuiper belt, kind of like the asteroid belt. Everything out there is mostly rock and ice. When I say ice, I mean water ice. The biggest objects, of course, are Pluto. And then Eris was discovered in, 2005 by Mike Brown. And this is the one that was named Xena. And I want to say he discovered a little before then. I don't remember the exact date that he discovered it, but he named it after the goddess of strife and discord because he knew that it was about the size of Pluto and this would bring everything into question. He had a news conference and he described the object as about the size of Pluto, maybe bigger, and they're trying to figure out what it is, and everybody around the world congratulated him on being the third person in history to find a planet, and this time he was an American. And he was like, okay, thanks, but he felt kind of like he was cheating because he wasn't really sure if Pluto and Eris were planets. So later he found a slightly smaller one called Almea, and this one has got one of the coolest stories. His book is really cool read, so it comes from that. It's called How I Killed Pluto and How It Had It Coming. And in it, he and his assistants, his lab assistants, had been looking at this object through the telescope on Hawaii for several months. And what you do in science is you make sure of your data before you release it. You never rush it, which is interesting because with the coronavirus, in the last less than a year, there have been tens of thousands of papers released on it, which is just not done in science. And it's because we're trying to save so many lives. But they were gathering data, trying to figure out, get the measurements, get the mass, get the orbit, get everything else. And then one day, his head lab assistant called him up and said, I got some bad news. This astronomer in Spain just discovered, and I believe they had code names before they came up with official names, and I think this one was called Santa Claus. So an astronomer in Spain discovered Santa Claus and announced it, which meant he got the discovery. So Mike Brown felt a little defeated, but he still had a lot of data, and he emailed the professor in Spain and said, congratulations, it looks like I've been studying the same object, maybe we can share some information. And the astronomer in Spain emailed him back and said, thanks or something, but nothing really came out of it. And then they got an anonymous tip from the internet that the astronomer in Spain had actually hacked into their telescope database and stole the discovery. This was at a weird time. This was when Mike Brown had gotten death threats over Pluto, for real. There was a discussion board on the internet based in Germany where they were so angry that Pluto was no longer a planet. They believe that a hacker from that group started, I don't want to say the word hacking because most scientific databases are not even password protected. Who's going to go look up something about the protein structure of such and such cell? They just have it available, and this guy in Germany had figured out how to get into the database of the telescope in Hawaii and was able to see that Mike Brown logged in at certain times and what object he was looking at. Then they believe this guy from Germany sent the Spanish astronomer the information and said, would you like to find a planet? And when they looked at the logs of that database, they saw an IP number, this is a computer number, from Germany, had accessed it a few days before it was, or a few weeks or whatever before it was discovered. And then something like a day or two before the discovery was announced, the same IP number of the professor that Mike Brown had been emailing had accessed the database. So this professor in Spain accessed Mike Brown's database, saw the object, and a couple days later announced it. He said that he had found it through old pictures, which is a very common method of discovery, but it was very suspicious. Mike Brown emailed him, presented him with evidence, and gave him a long time, I want to say 6 months, to come clean. And through, conversations and stuff, the guy never did. So he went public with it. And to this day, the discovery date, the IAU, International Astronomical Union, records the date it was discovered, the telescope it was discovered with, and the person who discovered it. So without super hard evidence, they decided, and I think everyone knew it was Mike Brown, they decided to give the date of discovery to the Spanish astronomer. The name of it came from the telescope of discovery was in Hawaii, which was what Mike Brown was using, and it's the only object without a name for the person who discovered it. So Mike Brown's okay with it. He named it, he likes to name his stuff after Hawaiian things because he uses the telescopes in Hawaii. So that's where Almea comes from. So Eris right there is about the same as Pluto. And that's Mike Brown there. He has discovered, I want to say, all of these. Makemake was his, Almea. Quewar, I think is how you pronounce it, is his. Sedna's his. I think the last three probably also his discoveries. So this is his specialty, and he's, like he said, discovered hundreds. But beyond the Kuiper Belt is this hypothetical, we're pretty sure it exists, area of icy objects that's probably the source of all of our comets. They bump around and fall toward the sun once in a while. They're kind of far away. Now, because of the pandemic, we can't all be together and go outside and do this walk, but I've done this in the past. We start at the baseball field, and the sun is about the size of a large beach ball or a wheel on a car. And as we walk, we don't even get past the stadium before we've passed Mars, and then it gets fairly empty for a while. Neptune is roughly where the cafeteria is, and Pluto is, if you are in the far corner of the parking lot by the stoplight and you start to climb the steps, that's where Pluto would be. The Oort cloud would start in North Georgia and extend all the way to Maine at that scale. So it's really extreme. Getting pictures of icy objects that are probably pretty small that far away, not so much. Maybe in the future, but we've got some pretty good evidence that it is there. But what's interesting is instead of an elliptical orbit around the sun, it's a spherical orbit. So these things literally would be millions and millions of miles apart, and they form a sphere around the sun instead of a circle or ellipse. We have some extreme trans-Neptunian objects. One of them is Sedna. It is on closest approach, which is called the perihelion, about 3 times the distance from the sun to Neptune, so it's really far away. But it's 31 times further away at the aphelion, which is the furthest it is. There's our best image of Sedna. Yes, it's a blurry pixel, and that's from Hubble Space Telescope. If you remember Kepler's laws, the further something orbits, the longer it takes to go around the sun. This takes about 11,000 years to go around the sun one time. There are quite a few other extreme TNOs out there, but one of the most exciting ones was announced in 2014 by Mike Brown and Konstantin Batygin. Konstantin and I are good friends on Facebook. And Mike Brown, I think, is just too many people out there. I did request friendship on Facebook once, and because I'm friends with other people at NASA, I guess he thought I was at NASA and accepted it, and then I guess I didn't make one of the cleaning up routines that he did once, so no longer friends. Alright, this was just like Neptune, where mathematical predictions show that there's probably something out there, and then they found Neptune later. We have not found this yet, but Pluto and Eris don't follow the correct trajectories, if you will. In fact, based on mathematical modeling, it looks like Pluto got bumped in, by gravity, got kind of pulled in and is orbiting close to the sun, and then it goes far away from the sun, close in. It's highly elliptical. In fact, it sometimes crosses the orbit of Neptune, so it's closer. When I was a kid, Pluto was closer to the sun than Neptune was, and now it's further from the sun. But whatever is disturbing these dwarf planets is going to kind of put Pluto back into the Kuiper belt and pull another object back out, and then it will become very eccentric, just like Pluto. So there's something out there disturbing these. Mathematical predictions say it's probably 5 to 10 times the mass of Earth, so it's a super Earth. But like I said, we've not observed it yet. We've been looking for quite a while. There's still debate. Is it there? Is it not? But there's something going on. There's something unexpected, and they're really trying to find it. Mike Brown and Konstantin Batygin said, let's call it Planet 9, because how exciting is that? You know, they were the ones that got rid of Planet 9, aka Pluto. Well, Batygin is actually a mathematician. He's not an astronomer, so the two of them have worked on it together. But we have quite a few telescopes scanning the skies looking for it. We'll see.